Governor Healey's new transportation funding task force met for the first time a few days back, tasked with making recommendations for sustainable funding for the MBTA and other transportation projects. The biggest question at hand, how can we fund the T and its near constant need for fixes in the short term and, heck, the long term? To answer that question and more, I'm joined by GBH News' transportation reporter, Bob Seay. Bob, thanks for being with us.
Sure, good to be here.
Yeah, so the big question is 31 members. Are we going to actually get something done?
Well, that's a very good question. You have that many people on a task force. Yeah. But it's made to represent the broadest cross-section of people in the Commonwealth, both geographically, economically, socially, with a lot of business representation, a lot of elected officials. So everybody's going to have a say in what this task force finally comes up with.
Well, speaking of having a say, we did talk to some folks, some writers of the MBTA, about how they think the MBTA should actually be funded. So let's take a listen.
I think the funding for the MBTA should come from a cross-section of different tax revenues throughout the Commonwealth.
Maybe increasing gas prices would help because it would get less cars on the road. I definitely don't think they should increase MBTA prices because this is what's accessible for most people.
I think that there needs to be some higher donor functions or something happening, maybe like a fundraiser for the city, something where more money can come in beyond taxes, because clearly we need more than that.
Yeah, so let's talk about what is their number one thing on the agenda there?
I think it's to develop a long-term sustainable funding source. That's the number one challenge, because we sort of go from crisis to crisis financially. And what was set up using the state sales tax, for instance, many years ago has not been adequate. And so they've always had to come up with some kind of way to plug those budget gaps. So that's the main goal. Let's get something that we can depend on and plan on in the years ahead.
So speaking of, we were talking a little bit about like the way that the T or subway transportation is thought of. And you actually spoke with the head of the New York Metropolitan Transit Authority, someone we know or may know. And, you know, they think about the subway, their version of the T, very differently. That's
right. Rich Davey, who's now heading up the MTA in New York, used to run the MBTA, and he was Secretary of Transportation here for a while, so he knows Boston very well. But as he put it in New York, the subway is like air and water. People just cannot live without it. And I'm not sure, even though the T is essential for what we do here in Boston, people perceive it the same way. And I think that has a lot to do with how willing people are to spend the money to keep it going.
And that's in New York. And I understand he's able to avoid a deficit over a vast transit system that, well, we were counting 3 states at least.
That's right. It's the largest system in the United States. In fact, if you took the next 7 largest transportation systems, they would not equal the New York system. They serve more than 7 million passengers a day. They have 47,000 employees. Budget of $20+ billion every year. So it's a very big operation. And so the financial situation is not the same as it is here in Boston. They have a tremendous amount of business support in New York City. And why I wanted to talk with Mr. Davey was they're the only transit system in the country coming out of the pandemic that actually has a balanced budget, not for just next year, but for the next 4 or 5 years. And I asked him, how did he do it?
Well, how did he?
Well, first of all, this business tax on all the employers in the city, the employers agreed to raise it from like 3.4 to 6%. I mean, a substantial amount of money. And that's going to produce more than $1 billion a year right there. Then there are 3 new casinos that are going to be built in New York City. And the transit system will be getting all of those revenues. And then they also have a paratransit situation there, which they share the cost with the state, but they've been willing to take on more of the cost, the Transit Authority, and they're getting more money from the state for that. So I think those are the general big, items that they're counting on. They also are raising fares. They already raised fares once. They're going to be raising them twice in 2025 and 2027, about 4%. And they have a huge transit system that they can toll. Unlike here in Boston, we're very limited, to the Mass Pike and Tobin Bridge and so forth and so on. In New York, they have all kinds of bridges and tunnels that they can toll. And so that revenue will be adding to the pot as well.
Well, we heard from folks, they don't want to pay any more taxes and they don't want to pay anything more in the tolls, but somehow the T needs to get to a point of good repair, which we are not at.
That's right. We're estimated $24.5 billion to get to that state of good repair. So the money does have to come from somewhere. And I think Governor Healy was smart, in a sense, not to take this on all by herself, but to have a whole group of people contemplate everything on the table. What do we have? From everything from tolls, fares, taxes, fees, congestion pricing, which is very controversial. Let's put it all on the table and see what we can come to agreement about. So,
is there any indication that because there's so many folks on this board from different places, different sectors, that perhaps maybe the perception will change about the necessity of the T and the need to fund it?
Well, I think people have come to realize, especially since the pandemic, how essential this transit system is. When we had the Orange Line shutdown a couple of years ago, people realized, wow, you shut down one of those subway lines, it really has a tremendous effect on people. And there's more of a realization that the people who depend on public transit are often people who have no other choice. They don't own cars. They're often lower income working people who really depend on it. And there's a certain obligation to make sure that they can get where they're going. And this is in terms of buses as well as the MBTA. So there's a lot of movement to improve the service on all levels. It's taking time. People are going to have to be patient. But at the end, there will be some kind of cost that we somehow are going to have to figure out how to bear.
Well, let's talk about buses, this redesign of Blue Hill Avenue. You said 15 years in the making.
That's right. 15 years ago, at least, it was first, proposed that Blue Hill Avenue, which is a fairly wide avenue, be reconfigured in some way to make it more attractive, more useful, easier to drive through, easier for buses primarily. So 15 years later, we finally have a plan and a commitment from Mayor Wu for $44 million to reconfigure Blue Hill Avenue. And the biggest change would be a center-running bus lane, so that the bus lanes would not have to be on the perimeter of the streets, taking away parking and interfering with that, which is always a big issue. But it would be running down the center. Now, this already happens on Columbus Ave. And even though there was some concern and opposition when it first went into effect, people have learned to live with it. And they realized that making the buses more efficient is really the most important goal. If you get on a bus and it's sitting there in traffic, it's not doing you or anyone else much good. But if you're getting on a bus that operates kind of like a subway, so that it can easily move up and down the thoroughfare, that's a huge difference. So I think eventually there's going to be community opposition. I know there's going to be a lot of community meetings to get people to buy into this because it's going to be a major change. But it's something that will make that avenue much more useful for people traveling and also living there as well, I think.
Yeah, lots going on, and of course we'll have you back to talk all about it. Bob Seay, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.